Welcome back to The Social and welcome to our book club. It's the next edition of The Social Chapter. And this time around, we dove into a classic, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Jess Allen, for those who are not in the know or perhaps need a little dusting off, give us a little synopsis.
So this is the first book Jane ever published back in 1811, and she tells the classic tale of two sisters, Elinor and Marianne, looking to find their perfect match. And we read about these women forced to make their way in the world without their father, and in true Jane Austen style, their story is set against the backdrop of English country life. And at the heart of the story is the debate between logic and emotion when it comes to love. Do you use your head or do you follow your heart?
Well, sticking to the theme of romance, we sipped on a pink wine while we were reading this book. It's called Saintly Rosé. It's a dry wine with beautiful strawberry aromas like summer in a glass. And it's Provence style, but produced right here in Canada. And you can get it for under 20 bucks.
So cheers to that, ladies.
Cheers.
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 So I really want to know what all of you thought of this book. We're each going to give it a rating out of 5 and spend 20 seconds defending our rating. And Lainey, you are up first.
So I gave this book a 4 out of 5, and here's why. 4, because it's not my favorite Jane Austen book. That would be Emma. But I love this book because, and all Jane Austen books, because they're just gossipy. This is gossip. This is neighbors talking about other neighbors. And you know what's amazing, too, is how shady Jane Austen is. She was shading parents. She was shading neighbors. She was sharing all the, the townsfolk. It's amazing. She was the original shady.
All right. Well, I too, it's true. I too gave this book a 4 out of 5. And here is why. We are in social isolation. Jane Austen's era, especially of women, that was their lives. They just lived day in and day out in social isolation. We had a lot to learn from this book about spending so much time with our families, how to pass the time, but also it's about what do you do with this unbridled passion, with this feminism. The only reason why I docked a point is because given today's discussions, we need to add some new voices to the canon of classic literature.
Oh, I love that, Mel. That's so good. Guys, I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5, and here's why. Because as an affable woman of 20 and 5, don't worry, I'm not going to deliver this like a Jane Austen character, but those characters, didn't it feel like you've met some of them before in your life? Their personalities and quirks are so well drawn and so shady, Lainey. I love that. But that's why I love this book, because the people we meet are memorable and funny. The writing is rich, and I learned new words like sagacity, and because it made me appreciate the artistry of the movie even more.
I think it might be sagacity.
Done. Close. Okay, so I gave this book a 5 out of 5, and here's why. To be honest, Jess, I didn't have this book on my shelf. I've never read it, and I have to be honest, I pulled this book out in the middle of the pandemic and was like, holy smokes, I am so not in the mood for this. So I did what any teenager would do if they were confronted with a book they didn't want to read. I watched the movie, and I have to say I loved it so much, and then I went back to the book, and I'm not finished it yet, but I still could. So this rating is basically on the movie, not the book, but I'm sorry, not sorry. That's all.
Oh my gosh, Cynthia, I love that you just admitted you didn't do your homework. Yeah, that is incredible. And the movie is one of the best adaptations, so you did such a good job. You're fine. But guys, let's chat about this, because Jane Austen is, of course, well known for her social observations and focus on women who are in charge of their own destinies, or not in charge of their own destinies, as it may be. Do you guys think this book is as relevant today as it was when it was first published back in 1811?
Oh, so much has changed and nothing has changed at all. Again, going back to my original point, love is hard. Love in a pandemic where there's social isolation and quarantining is even harder. There's so few choices for the women in this book, but there's a lot of women who probably feel like today in many circles, there are so few choices as well. And I really think about those parallels between the lives that we are currently living and the ones being lived by the women in this book. It's hard enough to find a good man, let alone in a pandemic.
I do think there are probably more relevant, more urgent things to be reading today for a woman coming of age today. But I have to say, there is something timeless in those characters. We've all met a Miss Lucy Steeles or a Mr. John Middleton. And even though they played minor roles, they stay with you, I think, because we've met them in our own lives today. And there's something very charming about that. And of course, charming about the different emotional personalities we see in Elinor and Marianne. I think we can all relate to that. We have, or at least I have, used my head in many cases, and I've been practical or prudent when it comes to love. But then, like Marianne, I've just been kind of a disaster too.
To me, what was interesting was not just the story, the love story, which was obviously very emotional, and I cried when Emma Thompson started crying in the movie. I was just like so attached to that.
Yes!
But at the same time, it's about power structures, and it's about hierarchies, and it's about who gets access to power. And so while this was very much centered on the story of women and women, power through being handed down money through your family, but also power through marriages and all those types of things, it was a reminder to me of some of the very big conversations that we're having right now. You don't just have to take it away, not very far from this particular story, to really see how those themes and the impact of power structures and who gets access to money and power are just as relevant today as they ever were.
Good point.
I agree with everything you all have said, everything. I also, it was really remarkable to me that conversationally, though, when you're talking about money and power, Cynthia, they were specific about money. Like the conversations were like, hey, how much are you bringing in this year? And you're worth $2,000 this year. He's getting $5,000 next year. I mean, think about the way we talk about money now and how precious we are. Like we don't name specific figures. And these people were out here in their countryside just throwing down figures like everybody knew what everybody else made. It was fascinating. I also want to go back to my gossipy shady point from earlier, because the way that Lady Middleton and the way that these people talked about children and the raising of their children or the perfection of their children was essentially a message board for moms in 2020. They were Mumsnet before Mumsnet. And that all of that to me is hysterical of how these habits of judging parents and judging children has persisted over 250 years.
Oh my gosh, Lainey, I love all of that. You're so correct. But right now, it is time to reveal our next social chapter selection. We're bringing the beach to our backyards for this one. I'm talking about Big Summer by New York Times bestselling author Jennifer Weiner. Now, critics say it's the perfect literary escape during these challenging quarantine times, and it's a book about female friendship, weddings, rich people, and the dangers of living through Instagram, which we can certainly all relate to.
Okay, we are not going to just read a great book. We are going to accompany it with a great drink as well. If it sounds juicy, it's only fitting that we sip on a local Niagara wine right here, grown in our own backyard. This is the Jackson Triggs Sauvignon Blanc. That will be accompanying our read of Big Summer. So everyone at home, make sure that you share your thoughts about this book. Use the hashtag, the social chapter, read along with us. And we'd love to hear what you think about our next read. So that concludes this edition of the social chapter. Join us for the next one coming up soon. And we'll be right back after this.